Appamada's programs and facilities are supported through your generosity. Your support really does make a huge difference. You'll find a link for contributions on the website at appamada.org/contribute. Thank you so much.
Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. Wearing the universal teaching, I realize the one true nature, thus harmonizing all being. Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. Wearing the universal teaching, I realize the one true nature, thus harmonizing all being. Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. Wearing the universal teaching, I realize the one true nature, thus harmonizing all being. And Trudy, I have news for you. I finished your Rakasu. So I'm going to give it to Flint when he gets here so he can ink it. And I'm going to go ahead and mail you the piece of fabric, the piece of green fabric for the envelope. And you can finish them.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, I know it's taken a really long time, but it's done. Here we are.
I think the time is immaterial. I'm just very grateful.
Can you see it?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay. All right. So thank you. I'll draw those lines, and I've already sewn the interface, and now I'm ready to sew the silk.
So the cut opening is perfectly square then. It's like each of the corners is 90 degrees and each of the sides is the same length. Yeah,
Yes.
then
Yes.
that looks good. Yeah.
Okay, that's the best I can do. Okay, thanks so much.
Yeah. No, great. Thanks for asking, and that's a clever way of visualizing what you know.
Isn't it? I mean, I'm quite impressed with that. I never thought of that. That's really, really great idea, Rosemarie.
Well, yeah, it was a little desperate.
Oh, and are there any more questions about where anyone's at before we jump in? I do want to make sure.
I will finish sewing the final two little squares on the front, and I guess then that means that I'm going to be ready to start the straps.
Yeah, that's right.
So at some point, some guidance on that would be lovely.
Okay. Thank you for getting me ready for that.
So what I've done, John, is I've got to the point where, how do I describe this? So I've got the frame and where I've pinned the ears back one way and the other way,
Mm-hmm.
and then turned it right side.
Mm-hmm.
If you like, I don't know if you can.
No, it looks good from what I could see there.
Yeah, so I've turned it right side, but it's like, what's next? What do I do next?
Yeah, so next is repinning. So you're going to take all of the pins out from the inside, because right now all your pin heads are inside of the frame because you've turned it inside out. So you're going to be carefully removing those and then placing new pins. And so what I recommend, the way I recommend doing that, so this is a long piece here. When we get things centered and better. So this is a long piece here, and this is a short piece here. And so the dog ear ends up right here. So it's this is where you would have that extra bit of fabric. So right now, it looked like you had, I could see now the inside out, I could see that pin just kind of sticking out like that with the head still inside of the frame. So you're going to remove that and making sure everything is still neat and square and coming neatly. And of course, you're still going to have seam allowance, so that's going to look different. But you're going to make sure that everything is neat, square. We don't press these edges. They kind of come together on their own, so we don't need to press these, and then we're eventually going to sew along them. But you should be able to see that it kind of makes this even length on both sides. And you're going to repin. First, I recommend one pin going parallel to the stitch. Oh, sun, hello. Beautiful, but it makes for a hard video. The one stitch parallel first, and then do your parallel stitches or your perpendicular stitches after that. And
What do you mean by perpendicular stitches? What?
oh, I'm sorry, perpendicular pins. Thank you for confirming. So not getting into the seam allowance, I usually do 3 to 4. So one here minimum, one pretty close to the edge or corner. They're hard to do at the corner. And then either 1 or 2 in between those 2 points. And that will help you when you're sewing, because that's how this garment, that's the guidance we've been sticking with, is perpendicular to the stitch that you're going to stitch is where you place those pins.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and a daft question. How do you know which is the front side of the frame? Which is the way up? Do you know?
You should be able to feel, and good question, not a daft one at all. One of those, if you peek inside, so this is mine, I've marked it with a piece of white thread just so I know forever and ever amen until it's time to remove that, that this is that corner. So inside here, let's see, yeah, I should be able to reveal
So
it
is that the
maybe.
corner where the two ends meet?
Come together, precisely. Yeah, you can hardly see it, so I'm not going to try to undo that any further, but that's the corner where the two ends meet, and the front of that corner is the top left of the garment. So, yes. So it's up here.
Right, that's helpful. Yeah, that's helpful, because that obviously that's it. It can only be that, can't it?
Yeah. I forget the best reasoning that I'm aware of is because the instructions are written with that basis. So we needed some arbitrary point at which that was festooned, but also because this bulkier corner is going to be covered by a strap. So if over time, because over time, these, even if you didn't press any little ridges into the material, like if you press over a seam, it gets that shiny appearance. Over time, you will get, with wear, more dirt and oil will build up on those points. So this would show over time. You would be able to see this bulkier corner. So we're going to cover that with our straps.
Right.
And I do recommend, as I've done here, I recommend using a off-color thread to indicate which corner is that front corner, or top left and front corner.
Yeah. Yeah, great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for asking. I might need to move this table a little bit. This is, I moved the sun. Y'all couldn't tell. Everything stayed in the same
We
position.
could see it. John, I have a simple question. It says for attaching the lining and the interfacing, because
Yes.
you're just attaching those, you're just sewing those two together. It says the same, what does it say? Same color?
Same color. Yeah.
Is that white?
I've used white. I have seen other people use the blue that matches the Rakusu. I've seen people use their stitching thread, the silk stitching thread. My only recommendation is use cotton because, insects died to make our silk. So just use cotton. The color does not matter.
Thank you very much.
And then do leave yourself, Rosemarie, a little bit of space. Don't do it all the way to the edge, because we're going to need to cut a little bit of those corners off. Oh goodness, I'm wrong corners in the shot. You're going to cut a little bit of each of those corners off, and if you sew too near to that corner, you'll be unable to cut that corner off.
So what about in the middle? Is that a good place?
Not in the middle. So let's assume where these pins come out is the edge of my interface or my silk, and then this is the edge of my interfacing. So about a centimeter, yeah, about a full centimeter. Let me make sure that's good. Yeah, I think a full centimeter would be fine because a full centimeter away on both would allow you quite a comfortable corner to cut off.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Are you okay, Claire?
Been quite all since.
Yeah, I feel slightly bewildered, but I'm gonna spend the quiet period looking back over videos at the bit I'm at.
Okay, and if you want, feel free to ask. There is one thing, this is kind of most for where you're at, Maria, that I want to clarify the guidance I gave at one point. It was referring to in these corners, the order in which where you start a stitch and where you end a stitch, and which direction you face the fabric. So the instructions, Anne and I talked about this, and we don't believe that it matters. The instructions say to start just inside of the seam allowance on one side, continue along that whole stitch, and then using the same thread, you kind of hide the transfer from one side to the other in between the layers of fabric. You continue the stitch down the other side, going until that seam allowance on that side, and then you finish in that seam allowance. And I recommended to knot your thread, so do your starting knot loose, free of any fabric, and then start your stitch at the corner. So you feed your needle in carefully, and you get it out where you want to start your first stitch, and that's how you begin. And then you also finish in the seam allowance. We've agreed that either method is okay. Either 8 separate stitches or 4 long stitches that's jump that corner. Either one we've agreed would work just fine. And I think the benefit of separate stitches is that you it's less to redo, basically. If you for some reason want to redo that stitch, you're only doing one side, not both. It also minimizes any of the challenge of jumping that corner, which really is not hard, but it can be, you have to hold your mouth just right, so to speak. And then the benefit of doing the single long stitch is that by starting your stitch, for me it would be, it would be like this, wouldn't it? By starting your stitch near the seam allowance, you don't have to feed your needle all the way into that point, which is just, it's a little nimble. You have to really kind of get in there and hold your mouth just right on that as well. But in both cases, your finishing knot will be near the seam allowance. And that's just, it would be impossible for me I could not tie in that corner. It's simply too tight. I could not get a tight knot if I had to tie a knot in that corner. So that's the reasoning there. So you have both options. Choose whatever just at first blush makes the most sense to you. 8 separate stitches or 4 long stitches that do both sides continuously.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
I'm sorry, John, I really didn't, I think I understood the choices that you're either doing one long, you're doing the front side and the back side without doing a knot in between. Or
Right.
you're doing one side knot and then do the other side.
That's right.
I didn't understand the 4 and the 8. It looks like to be like about 20 stitches there, so I didn't understand that part.
Oh,
What did you mean?
I don't know of a better word than, so I will use the term stitch to either describe each of these individual stitches in one long running stitch, because I guess you could call it a seam as well. But sometimes these lines of stitches are not on seams, so what do you call it? So I use stitch interchangeably to mean individual stitches, or is there a better term that's used in?
A line of stitching, is that what you mean?
Yeah, a line of stitching is what I mean. So either 4 long lines of stitching that cross from one side into the other, or 8 lines of stitching so you do 1 line of stitching here on the front, and then you flip and you do an entirely separate line of stitching for the back.
So when you say 4 and 8, you're talking about all 4 corners.
That's right.
Thank you. Now I understand.
No, thank you for calling me on that. I've been grappling or struggling with this for a while.
Well, I use shorthand all the time, and people don't know what I'm talking about, so it happens.
That code that you developed with that friend 20 years ago, and
Exactly.
Yeah, nobody gets it. They should just get it. Yes.
You were saying to sew the lining and the interfacing about a centimeter from the edge of so so my interfacing is a little bit bigger than my silk. Should they be the same?
Or no, they can be, sometimes they aren't. I know for a fact that y'all's aren't, in part because of a measuring whoopsie.
Right.
So
The silk is shorter, so I'm thinking I should measure from the silk to give myself more space for those corners.
you can do that, and that would be secure. One thing to be sure is so one thing that you can do if you want to give yourself kind of an eyeball. So where I have this sewn edge, that's right where my chalk line was. So that, just imagine that this is the chalk line you just drew for
Okay.
the seam allowance of your face.
Okay.
And you can actually measure from here 3.2 centimeters, and just sew right on that 3.2 centimeters, or closer. And the reason for that is the interfacing should never extend beyond 4.2 centimeters beyond that chalk line, the interfacing, because that's roughly what this distance should be, which on mine, this one is 4.2, but I know for a fact one of my edges is 4.5 because of that just happens. And so if you want to measure it that way, you can do that. I think that also just doing a little bit inside of the frame of the silk, again, you can just kind of look at how much corner you need to remove. You can go around that chalk edge and you can do a full 4.2 centimeters and see if at any point your interfacing extends beyond 4.2 centimeters of your face, because you'll know that you're going to need to cut that interfacing eventually. So being within a centimeter of that is what's important, really. Does that make sense?
Almost. I'm almost with you. So,
Okay.
measuring from the chalk line, um, and I should be stitching the two together, no more than 3.2 centimeters. Is that correct?
Yeah, that would be very safe.
Well, I'm like, it seems like I should be almost, yeah, that's, I don't know. Okay, my interfacing is only almost 2.5 inches beyond the top of the edging of the fabric. So from the chalk line, from the edge of my interfacing to the chalk line is only 3.6 centimeters.
Is that distance that you're describing, is that when the interfacing is centered on the face?
Yeah, it's already sewn on the face.
And it's extending 2 inches beyond it?
Not 2 inches, 2.5 centimeters. Oh no, I'm sorry. No,
Beyond,
that's not right. It's about 3 from the edge of the interfacing to the edge of the fabric.
what about with the chalk line?
Chalk line 4.
Okay, then that's good. That's good. That means you won't have to cut that edge. It needs to be less than 4, or less than 4.2 away from the chalk line. Should be the edge of the interfacing, and you need to be 1 centimeter inside of that. So if you put your ruler on your chalk edge,
Mm-hmm.
or your chalk line
Mm-hmm.
facing out, 3.2 is the maximum distance that I recommend you sew.
Okay, so see, I have this really weird little corner that, was not on the silk, that wasn't square. So
Mhm.
it's like lopped off. So I
Uh-huh.
I feel like I need to sew pretty close to the like almost like an inch maybe. I don't even know that I could get not an inch, a centimeter away from the edge of the fabric. It's and let me show you what I'm talking about. Here. Can you see how the silk is like, you might not
Will
be able to
you will
see
you
it.
move it a little bit so that it's with a dark background? Even just your face is fine.
I
I
don't think
can't
you can
really.
see it. Oh, I'm sorry. I have it the wrong way. No, I think you can. Can you see how it's sort of lopped, lopped off there? It's crooked at the right at
Uh,
the edge. It's not
okay,
square there. It's like lopped off.
sure.
So I feel like I'm gonna have to sew pretty close to the edge of the fabric in order to be able to get to cut off those corners.
Will you show me again? Because if the silk falls far enough inside of the frame, or is significantly smaller than the interfacing, you'll probably won't be cutting the silk at all. You'll probably only be cutting interfacing. Will you put them back together again? Sorry, I'm just got to move something on my screen. So it looks to me like you're only going to be cutting interfacing on that corner anyways.
Oh, okay.
Um, so yeah, just a little bit. Um, I think a full centimeter within the silk would also probably fine, because you're just trying to help make sure that they stay together during the construction process. Eventually, you're going to sew this down on the frame in 3 different places, so it's going to be very secure once all is said and done.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for checking.
John, do you pin one corner at a time and sew one corner at a time, or do you pin them all and then sew them?
I would recommend pinning each of them before sewing. When you pin each of them, that will give you a chance to feel any strange tension or notice that it's all anti-goggling, that it's not square anymore. And you should be able to, once completely pinned, lay it on a flat surface and see that it looks okay. It does a quick litmus test. So that's what I would recommend.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
And another question, on the corners, is it the kind of slightly over? It looks like the kind of over. It's not joining, it's kind of, I don't know how to describe what I'm trying to ask. I'll spotlight
Can you show
my
me?
thing
Yeah,
that
please
I'm
do. Yeah, please do.
right. So you've got a corner there.
Mhm.
Don't know if you can kind of see it in the light. I don't know if it's coming out. And it's kind of like that kind of goes over a bit, like it's all that side's kind of slightly over, and you sew down there.
So when you say over,
Oh, my phone's saying it doesn't understand me. Hang on, I'll just turn that off. I don't understand me either. You're all right.
so you're saying that visually that angle doesn't look like 45 degrees to you?
Oh no, it looks
Is
like
that
45 degrees, but like the seam,
uh-huh.
it's kind of, it comes over, doesn't it, a bit?
That is correct.
Yeah, and then you
Um,
sew just along that
right,
as near as you can get.
right. So you want to confirm that it should perceptibly be one piece should perceptibly be on top of the other. Is that kind of what I'm understanding?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's correct. The seam doesn't split in the middle, where you're kind of going out two different directions underneath. One side is fully underneath the other side, so that means on top, one piece will fully be on top of the other. So
right.
so yours is perfect then.
Great. Oh, perfect. So that's I won't go that far. You haven't seen it in real life. But yeah, because the top right corner didn't quite look like that, but you can tease it, can't you, to kind of bring it over a bit.
Yeah, what do you mean by not looking like that? So real quick, I'll just I'll blaze through. So the two top corner or the top piece is always on top of the long pieces are always on top of the short pieces. So your top right and your top left corner, the long edge should look like it's on top of the short edge, and likewise at the bottom, the long edge should look like it's on top of the short edge on the front. But on the back, it will be the reverse because you've flipped them the other way around. On the reverse, on the back side, the long edge will look like it's under the short edges.
I think mine's the other way around. It
Well,
looks
so that's how you can. So I should have. Thank you for pointing this out. So earlier, when I was talking about identifying which one is the top left corner,
yeah.
it is in part based upon which layer is on top or which edge is on top of which. So this is my top left corner, and I knew that because it both had the extra fabric and because it was on top of the short edge was underneath the long edge was on top of the short edge.
Yeah.
Does that match what you're
Yeah,
seeing?
the two top ones are over,
Good,
the
good.
short ones, and and then at the bottom it looks like the short one's over the long one. So I need to do something different, do I? I don't. It just looks like that they're over. They're kind of coming over the long
Will
one
you?
at the bottom.
Can you show me?
Um, so this is the bottom. I don't know if you can kind of see that it's the bottom. So it looks like these short sides are over. Do you get me there? They're
And
kind of over.
and you're showing to me the front right now. That's
Yeah,
the front that I'm looking at.
that's
Yeah,
the
so
bottom.
it looks like when you were folding your dog ears, you went the wrong direction on two of them. You got like you lost your place and then you reversed in the wrong order, sort of, because everyone should be alternating. And it looks like you did one possibly backwards, and then the next one you reversed based on that one, which means that it in turn was reversed. So it's not a hard fix. So what you're going to do is you're going to unpin it and very carefully actually change the direction of the dog ear inside of the corner, which will feel scary, and there you might I would have to be I would be experiencing tension while doing that, but it's a fairly it's a single maneuver and it can be done pretty comfortably. And remember, at this point, you haven't sewn anything. It's all just pins. So worst case scenario, everything can be unpinned and you can begin again. You can turn it back wrong side out and you can do your dog ears again if need be, which really is not that much that there's not much lost, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I think you'd understand it even better going through the next time because you now see how it is or right side out. So
Right.
try to unpin it and revert, put your finger underneath inside and reverse the direction of that dog ear, putting the pin on the opposite side. Try that.
Yeah.
And then if that just is giving you too much trouble, then you can unpin and reverse it and do it again.
Great. Thank you. Glad I
Sure.
asked, because I was just going to think, well, it won't matter. And then I thought, no, Maria.
No, definitely ask your questions, get good guidance, because again, there's my horror story that my Rakusu, the one with my name on the back of it, the some of the tons and chos alternate as opposed to all being this piece on top of this piece. This piece is below this piece, which is incorrect. So definitely ask your questions, do your clarification, and it'll look like everyone else's for whatever that is worth.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Claire, earlier you mentioned that you were re-watching some videos. How are you doing now?
I have redrawn the lines on the face, so it's a
Okay.
rectangle.
Okay.
And I've trimmed the edges of the interfacing and I've trimmed the corners. So
you're gearing up for the frame then?
I am. I'm just ironing the piece of fabric so that to help my measurements be accurate.
Great. So it sounds like you've come back into less befuddlement, if I remember the word you used earlier.
Yes. Less.
Trusting the process a little bit more.
I'm definitely experiencing the contrast between having really enjoyed doing all the sewing on the face because I felt like I understood what I was doing and I like to understand what I'm doing, and now it is less comfortable as I acclimatise to a new phase. And so I was just wondering whether the side of the fabric that says frame to indicate that that's the right piece of fabric, does that mean that's the right side
versus the wrong side?
Yeah.
We've Anne and I have actually done some experimentation to see if we could tell kind of some blind A/B testing or what do you call it? not placebo testing, but we've done some testing to see if this fabric has a particular right or wrong side that's identifiable. And no,
Right.
we can't tell the difference. So if you blindfolded us, handed us a piece of fabric and said, is that right side or wrong side? Or if we were looking at it, we can't tell. So I think that
Amazing.
you're safe to use either side. And probably if we marked frame on, was it marked inside or outside of the margin?
There is no margin.
Was it marked? Oh, that's right. We sent them unmeasured entirely. More than likely, that is the right side,
Okay.
just because that's the side that faces us as we cut. But there is a chance that it was the wrong side, and again, it doesn't really matter on this fabric. So.
Okay. Thank you. That's reassuring.
Good.
And so, in terms of marking up, then, I am within the 2mm, but so my frame, the lengths are out, but only by 1.5mm each.
Yeah,
Do
I think that's okay. That's within the realm that you can kind of ease the fabric and ease the frame or the frame on to the face, which will cause a little bit of, it won't be perfectly square on the back then, because that's where you're borrowing that fabric from. But all in all, it will still look like a rakusu, wear like a rakusu and everything.
Great.
I think 2mm is beyond that is where you start having problems.
Okay. Do I use the two different measurements? So the two bits where it says length of top and length of bottom, do I use the exact slightly different figures, or do I just pick the biggest or the midway point?
The midway point is probably what I would recommend. I did it with the separate ones this last time to experiment, and I haven't noticed a difference yet, but I haven't fully sewn the frame on. But in the past, it has the general idea has been split the difference when there is that kind of a change.
Lovely. Thank you. And then I don't have a Hera.
Okay.
I was wondering whether one workaround would be to just do another chalk line, as long as I'm keeping track of which the right side and the wrong side is.
Given that all of these chalk lines wear off pretty easily and naturally, that probably would be okay. The alternative there would be to find another. The Hera is just a piece of hard, I think polypropylene probably. So a fairly hard but not very stiff. I mean, it's stiff, but it's not brittle, I guess is the word I'm looking for. Kind of a plastic. So you could possibly use a credit card. You could try using a credit card you don't care much about.
Okay.
I don't know if you could get enough force comfortably, because the edge itself is it's about the thickness of a credit card on the actual Hera edge. The question is, of course, can you put enough force with a credit card? I can't think off the top of my head of other household items that could work, but anything that gets you sort of a credit card width edge of bone or plastic.
You can buy them from eBay and they'll come quite quickly.
I know. I just don't like buying things that I'm only going to use once.
Yeah.
And then I don't know how I'll get it.
I could post you mine.
That is very kind. That's a very kind offer. I will try a credit card, and if I think that doesn't work, then I will message you and take you up on it.
Great. I can post it to you.
Can I just make a comment on just one more comment on the Hera? Claire, if you have a ruler, I just used the corner of my ruler and it did exactly the same indentation as a Hera would.
Well,
The plastic ruler.
Yeah.
Is that the one that we sent, the little 6 centimeter one? Or 6-inch one, rather?
I don't think you sent one. I didn't get a ruler, but I've got
Yeah, it's just a plain plastic ruler that I've got. Like the one John's holding, and I just use the corner, and it doesn't cut the material; it just indents it. Like just exactly the same as the Hera, I imagine. It indented
thanks,
it
guys.
without damaging it.
John, I have. Are you done, Claire? Did you have any questions? Okay, John.
Yes.
So, as Claire was speaking, I'm realizing that my top to bottom left and right measurements are a little bit different too, and I guess I was supposed to be evening those out too. That makes sense, and I didn't think of that. So there's about a 0.3 difference between the two, top to bottom on either side. So like I got 16 point 3 on one side and like 16.7 on the other side. So that's and it's, you know, with my paper frame it looked right, but let's see. So
Do you have a square handy?
Yes.
Why don't we try, because ultimately we don't experience Rakusu in the real world in terms of millimeters. We're not looking at things with a measuring device, but our eyes are relatively good, varying and identifying squareness and evenness. So let's take a square and I guess go up into each of your corners and look for any corners where the corner itself is not square, or the corner is square but the line deviates. I don't know how that would happen if the corner is square, actually. That's kind of the whole point of a square corner. But look just to make sure, I guess, double check that your lines are straight, because that's a possibility, something slipped while measuring. But more importantly, that each of your corners are square.
Now this is helpful because when I put the square on one of the bottom corner, let's say, yes, one of the lines, I've got one of them on the square and the other one is not exactly right. So yeah, okay. So I think this is going to solve the problem.
Okay. Use if the so you mentioned 16.3 and 16.7.
Yes.
My measurements are 16.1 and 16.2. So if the 16.3 side, if like both of those corners are square, I would use that as kind of your reference point, as your sort of
the shorter one. Okay.
Maybe if only if both of the corners check out to be square after all.
Okay. So let me try that. Thanks.
Yeah, sure.
Let's see.
Trudy, we've got 15 minutes left today. Do you think that you have that you're at a point to discuss the?
I am.
Okay, great. So I'm guessing probably your question is about how to measure the length. That's probably, I'm guessing.
Well, because I had to measure the length of mine, I asked, because I'm making mine for Catherine.
Okay.
So I asked her, and I was just trying to find the measurement that she gave me. But I think it was 39 centimeters. Does that sound about right?
I would need a proper, what does that measure on a torso? Let's see. So this is 27 here. You said 39?
Yeah, so the length for her, oh right, so the length of the strap that she gave me was 39 centimeters.
That's too short.
That's too short. Okay.
Yeah.
So so when I measured mine, I looked at Josh's rakusu and um, measured from holding my hands, and
Mhm.
because I'm a lady with a substantial bosom, it was kind of longer than I think initially we'd thought. So
Mhm.
I can't remember what measurement I sent to Anne to do though. Um, but so will I have to ask Catherine to measure again for herself?
I believe so. And I'm trying to think of the best way to get that measurement. Some sort of clever way to do this between, space, time, remoteness.
Hmm.
Um, what might work, in fact, actually, if Catherine has a meter stick or a yardstick, which many people do, I would assume, or even
I
just something.
Yeah, I'm not sure she will have that, but she measured it with a soft tape measure.
Well, any long, straight piece of material would work. So even just like a 2x4 or a piece of wood could work. My thought is to use a string going to, um, you can measure the width from one corner to another on the top from the
Yep.
outside of the frame, and her length needs to be, so if she, how do I verbalize what I'm envisioning? I could draw something. Let me draw something real quickly.
Thank you.
And one option, Trudy, would be that you ask my John to meet up with her with he'll have a
He will.
yardstick or a meter rule.
He will have such a thing, won't he?
What does he have? I'm sorry. He has a rakusu.
No,
No, but
he'll have a stick.
yeah,
Oh, okay.
he used to be a handyman, so he'll have lots of rigid measuring devices.
Implements of measurement of some sort.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing it's about 34, 27 plus 8.4. I'm 35.4. So 35.4 is roughly what a rakusu is in length. So let's do 7. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm talking out loud. So I would
Yeah.
tie a string, twine, or something not a super thick rope, but rope could work, a narrow one. Tie it on one end, and then keep retying it until shashu hands would fall comfortably beneath the line, and keep retying it. And once you've got the distance, it's going to be the length of this. It's going to be that length. Oh, I'm off the page. I'm sorry. Um, so this is tied first. This is not moving. This is staying there. This is the width from corner to corner on the rakusu.
Mm-hmm.
This length, keep adjusting it until Shashu could comfortably fall underneath it. She could even hang something, the height of the rakusu, over it, just to give the idea of the rakusu. And then this distance from here to here, you will need to add 5.2 to get the total length. That is the 4.2 of this frame length, roughly, plus an additional centimeter for the seam allowance on the strap, because the strap, if you've seen, comes to the edge of the frame.
Yeah.
So maybe that's something that you could communicate to her as an option.
Okay. I shall see what I can do about that.
Okay.
That sounds like, yeah, I get that. So there's a using a something rigid there to get the width of the rakusu, so that when you're holding it and it drops, you've got your shashu it's sort of exactly in the middle, really.
Mm-hmm. The only challenge with that is that the material on the way the straps actually land on it's not a, it is a flat piece of material that's going around a human's shoulders and neck. So the top edge, I'm trying to remember, I'm going to need a reference. I'll be right back. Okay, so what I was attempting to think through was, so I've got, this is like a full 8 centimeters. And this edge, if you follow it all the way along, it ends up being on the, this falls further away from the top of my head. So the top of my head would be up here somewhere,
Yeah.
and then this would be traveling down my back. So it is on the lower side, whereas this is coming up almost to the bottom of like what would properly be called the nape of my neck,
Yeah.
whereas this is falling closer to my back. And how to accurately describe this to someone who has a ruler hanging from their torso, I feel like is going to be the key challenge. So I'm trying to imagine how, so if we tied another 2 ends to 8 centimeters away, how do we help Catherine, negotiate that? And I don't think it would work. I think so historically, the best guidance would be to take an actual rakusu face and pin an 8 centimeter wide strap of fabric, because that's going to fairly accurately mimic, a force to use actual fabric, scrap fabric rather. So that's an interesting challenge.
Yeah,
Do you know?
I think what Anne told me to do was to get us like a soft, like we use in the sewing, the tape measures, and from the middle, the nape of my neck, so like doing the one from the nape of the neck rather than the slightly lower down, and running it round to where your hands are, so that kind of just below, I guess just below your hara, really. It's kind of, I'm thinking it's kind of there.
Is Catherine a smaller bodied person?
She's slightly smaller than me, I think.
So the midway point from I know mine is a little over a meter long.
Right.
But I'm an extremely tall person, so that's not necessarily a good measure. That's about as tall as you'd ever make one, or as long as you'd ever make them. Let me grab.
What I could do is, I mean, Josh has a rakusu. He's a taller man, but I could see if there's a way that I could meet up with Catherine and see if there's a way to measure it, her rakusu on him.
That might be wise, because that's gonna, I think, and especially if you can bring a piece of the fabric with you. Yeah, that might just be the ticket if that is not too inconvenient.
It's a little challenging, but you know, there's no rush. So,
There's another option. Well, sort of. No, that's effectively the same as what we were just discussing.
yeah, 39 looks really short, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen some that are very, very short, but they,
No, that sounds crazy short.
yeah. I think the person that had one that might have been that short was dissatisfied with how short it was.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Because you have to include the little bit that covers the top of the frame, don't you? That's it. The length is the whole length, but includes the little flap that's over the front of the frame.
right. And I think, but even if you added that, what, 8.4 centimeters or
Yeah.
10.4 centimeters, I still think that 39 would be worth double checking.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll be here next week, but we'll be back the week after.
We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
see you in 2 weeks.
Bye.
Happy sewing.
So, and I hope you have a square or access to something square, because that's really going to be important on this one. So draw this line first. If you're lucky and you have a piece of selvage already, that's perfect. You might consider, if you're comfortable and you know how to pull thread to get a straight edge, you might also do that on this edge. Where before you're even measuring it, you know that you've got it's straight in terms of the actual fibers in the fabric itself. So this edge will be first. Measure it accurately, but only bother marking the 2 ends lengths, where, as a refresher, there's going to be this whole slew of lengths that you have to think about. Just mark the starting point and 121.9 in my case. So do that. You've got your complete full length here.
I'm sorry, I think you lost me. What's the 121? I don't understand.
So the 121.9 is 1 plus 4.2 plus 27.0 plus 8.4, 16, 8, 27, 8, 16, 4, 1. All of that sums up to 121.9.
Thank you.
And I find it helpful to write all of my measurements, the part measurements below, and then write the running total. So just like the 1 plus 4.2 is 5.2 plus 27 is 332. Writing that up top, I find that to be helpful.
Okay.
So
you're
120. Go ahead.
no, sorry, I interrupted you. Go, John.
So you've got your starting and you've got your finishing line. That's what you're marking first, and then mark this full length. If you're not using selvage or a pulled thread, you will need to mark this. So you'll be marking one line here just to indicate where the start is, one line here to indicate where the finish is, and then marking this if you're not starting from selvage or a pulled thread or pulled edge. Next, using your square.
Excuse me, when you say
yes.
marking, you're saying drawing a line.
Yeah, that's right. So assuming that was a cut edge or selvage, you just mark a little bit line inside. Otherwise, you can mark above, either way. So measure and mark that full length for the total length. Then take your square and put your square, and this is going to look way too big on here, of course, but put your square up against the line that you just measured, or the thread you just pulled, or the selvage, and mark that vertical line. With such a long reference line, this is almost certainly going to end up square. So you can be pretty confident marking that. And that needs to be, I believe, 10.2, 10.4. So that measure that 10.4. And while you've got your ruler there, go ahead and mark your seam allowances as well. So you'll want to mark these seam allowance lines here, 1 centimeter in on both sides.
Can I ask a question? So the 10.4 is the 4.2 and 4.2 and 1 and 1 for the seam allowance?
Exactly, yes.
Thank you.
So far, we have this line measured, and it's just the total length measured and marked. We've got this line measured, and we've got its seam allowances marked. So we've got the line itself. This finishing point is marked, just a little dash to indicate where the end is. The seam allowance and this seam allowance are marked. So we've got a total of 3 marks on this line, not including this corner. Do the exact same on this side. So you're going to take your square up against the long selvage, pulled thread, or marked edge. You're going to measure and mark the total length plus the 1 centimeter seam allowances. So you'll have, so you should have this 10.4 and this 10.4. Next, do the following either once or twice as you see fit. You're going to take your square and a ruler and just plop it down somewhere in the middle. If you're doing 2, maybe do it a third of the way. If you're doing 1, just do it right in the middle. But you're going to go ahead and measure that 1 centimeter for your seam allowance on both sides and the finished length once or twice. You're going to do that. And so this line that you see here, this number 4 line, this is not drawn yet. What we're doing is, as I've described previously in terms of measuring, is it's going to give us something to average against to make up for our human error and the way fabric and stuff moves. And I'm marking it twice because it's such a long piece. I usually do it twice. So I mark 1 centimeter, 1 centimeter allowance, and then the finished 10.4. So what you will have is you'll have this full line, this full line, this full line, plus seam allowance markings here, 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 and here.
Okay,
then,
question, sorry. So,
yes.
So this outline that you just drew, the rectangle, is actually getting this one piece of fabric that we have to be an actual rectangle. Then we're doing the seam allowances within that. Is that correct?
I'm not sure I understood the question.
Well, it seems like we are cutting this fabric to be an actual a real rectangle. Is that correct?
That's right. But at this point we're not cutting anything. We're just marking.
Right. But I mean, that's the idea. That's the goal.
Yeah, and you'll see the reason for this here in a second. The reason that we're not bothering with any of these internal marks yet will come clear here in a second. So you've got your seam allowance and lengths marked in these different places. So go ahead and do all 3 of these extra long lengths. So you're going to mark the long seam allowances and the outside edge for the entire full long length. So you should now have 4 long lines in these 2 ends. Next, seam allowance here. So you do the short seam allowances on the ends. And then now, actually back up. Don't bother doing that. Sorry, I prefer to do this all in one go for future viewers so they don't get confused. And for you, goodness. So y'all don't get confused. So go along here. And now is when you want to make all of these interior marks. So I'm going to want to make my 1 centimeter mark, my 5.2 centimeter mark, and mark into the seam allowance. So I'm going to pull it close. So when I'm 32.2, which is the running total for this length for I'm at this corner, mark into the seam allowance. I'm going to mark into the seam allowance here at 40.6, 56.7, 65.1, and do that all the way down through both seam allowances. So on each side, you'll do that where you mark into the seam allowance. So once you've done that, so on this, back to this side, you've got all those marked. That's when you will mark the 1 centimeter seam allowance, because that's what you just measured that, as well as, oops, we're not there yet. These little marks all the way down. I'm not going to bother drawing them all. Once you have the marks in the seam allowance, let's use this corner as an example. So you have these 4 marks. That's when you will mark, oh gosh, the X's. And they go from the measure at where this little mark meets that inner line. And that's why we didn't bother marking all of these measurements on the outside, was because we're actually drawing these X's from the seam allowances. So it didn't make sense to mark those until this point. And so you're going to do that for all of your little X's and all your little, I guess, V's, whatever that is. And once you have all of this done, that's when you'll go over it with the Hera. And you'll do the Hera. You don't need to do the Hera on the outside, obviously, because it's going to be a cut edge, but the Hera all the way along the seam allowance and the X's. If you're looking at the color version of this, these are little tiny dotted lines you can hardly see in the video.
Oh, I can see.
Yeah, they're pretty bright green on the original file. Those don't get marked at all. Those are just there to show that those are squares, or that those are perpendicular to each other. What questions are there? What was unclear about that?
So John, what I think you just showed us was what your little notes on the side say in terms of the step 1, 2, 3. Is that correct?
Right, that's correct. Yeah.
Could you make a picture of that, like
of the notes? I would
of that one sheet, if you're comfortable with it the way it is.
I'd rather retype it.
Oh, I don't
yeah.
want to make you do that.
No, I can do that. That's fine.
Well, I just took some notes as you were talking, so I could email those notes to you, Rosemary, and then say if they aren't enough to.
Oh, that would be wonderful. I mean, I did too, but I don't know if I'll really understand them afterwards. But that would be great. So why don't we do that, John? And if we have questions, we can always get to you.
Okay. I could probably also.
It's a lot to digest, and I think, little by little, with all my questions, I think I'm getting the picture.
Yeah, if you do have questions, let me know. Claire, will you put me on CC just so if they're really good, I'll just steal them if you don't mind.
Yeah.
And then I'm thinking that there's a lot of white space on this particular worksheet. So if we're going to recreate it, it might be worth putting additional instructions in it. All right.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for staying after, John.
Yeah.
Thanks, John.
No,
Appreciate it.
Thanks for asking. It's good to see y'all.
Good to see you too. See you soon.
Yeah, see you in 2 weeks.
Take care.
Thank you, Claire.
Thanks, Rosemary. Bye.
Bye.